Vanakkam. Hello friends. The imperial Cholas, beginning with Vijayalaya Chola, ushered in a new era in the art and architecture of the Chola Empire from the 9th century onwards. His son Aditya Chola I vanquished the Pallavas and to commemorate the victory, gilded the roof of the Citrambalam with solid golden tiles. His son Parantaka Chola I was also an ardent devotee of Shiva and built a sepulchral shrine for his father and established a linga on it. The Cholas were ardent devotees of the Lord, but the dancing Shiva himself had not yet attained his full form and was rather worshipped in a marginal way, as is pointed out by Dr. Padma Kaimal, a professor in the Colgate University in the US, whose PhD thesis is on Indian art obtained from the University of California, Berkeley. She points out how out of over 100 granite shrines constructed by these Chola kings all throughout the Kaveri Delta, that too as reliefs high above in the ceilings in an inconspicuous position with some of the iconographic elements missing, like for example, the Ganges in the hairlocks of Shiva is notably missing. These four reliefs, namely at the Sadayar temple in Tiruchinnampundi in 920 AD, the Nalthunai Ishwarar temple at Punjai belonging to 940 AD, the relief in the Masilamani Ishwarar temple at Tiruvadurai that was funded by Parantaka Chola I assigned to 945 AD, and the relief at the Yerumbishwarar temple in Tiruchirappalli, which is Padal Petra Sthalam, which again today goes by the Sanskrit name Pipileshwara temple, also has a relief of the dancing god. By 969 AD, the Nataraja concept had achieved sufficient status to be included in the newly introduced iconographic element of the temples, the Arthamandapa, and by 981 AD, Nataraja was given the central place of worship on the south wall of Chola temples. Douglas Barrett, a noted art historian and curator of the British Museum, who curated the Oriental antiquities from 1971 to 1992, points out how one of the very first Natarajas is found in the temple of Palamalai, the Padal Petra Sthalam Mudukundram, which today we know as Vritachalam, where in the Virudhagireeshwara temple there is an inscription that reads that this temple was built by the great Chola queen Sembiyan Madevi in 981 AD. The Shiva temples at Tirunarayur, Tiruppugalur, Tirunageshwaram and Tirumaraikadu are all dated to this period. Wife of Kandaraditya Solan, who himself was a very great devotee of the Lord and ruled between 950 and 957 AD, Kandaraditya Solan was also a great poet, and one of his hymns is included in the Thiruvisaipa, which forms the 9th Tirumurai of the Panniru Tirumurai, the 12 Saivite tenets, and his song goes, Seeran Malgu Thillai Sembon Ambalathadi Tannai Karar Solai Koli Vendan Tanjayar Kon Kalanda Ara Insor Kandaradithan. The poem shows how he ruled from Koriyur, that is Urayur near Trichy, and from Tanjavur. After his demise in 957 AD, Sembiyan Madevi took upon herself the task of constructing magnificent temples in the Chola regions, endowing them with generous gifts. She survived her son Madurantaka Uttama Cholan, who ruled from 969 to 984 AD, and continued building these temples even into the reign of the great Rajaraja Chola. And again here Douglas Barrett notes the full-fledged canonical form of the Ananda Dandava Nataraja appears for the first time at the Koneri Rajapuram temple built by Sembiyan Mahadevi between 969 and 976 AD. The queen played a pivotal role in spreading the Nataraja cult and pressing for its acceptance as a royal emblem of the imperial Cholas. From the late 9th century, at which time the Chola rule was centered around Tanjavur, Urayur and Palayarai near Kumbakonam, the empire started expanding through wars and conquests, and by the 11th century, when under the reign of the great Chola king Rajaraja Chola I between 985 and 1014 AD, wherein he consecrated the Brihadishwara temple or the Peruvudayar Koil at Tanjavur in 1010 AD, the Cholas had created a vast empire, and by the end of the 11th century were claiming hegemony from the southernmost tip of the continent through the Kaveri regions up to Andhra and Karnataka in the north and the west, and as far as Sri Lanka in the east, as also across the Southeast Asian countries where they had very strong maritime trade, evidenced by the Shiva temples of Thailand and Cambodia, where you see reliefs of the dancing Nataraja accompanied by Karaikal Ammayar. Professor Hermann Kalk of Germany, whose PhD thesis is on the Thillai temple Chidambaram, with special reference to the Chidambaram Mahatmyam, who was also the recipient of the Padma Shri in the year 2010, points out how, beginning with the 10th century AD, the priests of the Thillai temple, who call themselves the legendary priests of yesteryears, whom Sundarar famously sings, Thillaival Andanartham Adiyarkum Adiyen, began to reframe the religious identity of this long sacred place with the intention of transforming an isolated local religious tradition into a pan-Indic one that could draw pilgrims from distant places, bringing more spiritual prestige and wealth with a broader regional impact. Kalk finds that similar transformations, Sanskritizations, occurred in temples across medieval India. This was in perfect synchronization with the ambition of the imperial Cholas, whose military power protected the temple, a pan-India image for their royal emblem, Lord Nataraja, would in turn enhance their own prestige. Many South Indian temples had Mahatmyams, in Tamil we call it Talavaralaru, which constructed a temple's history and tradition out of local legends, historical events and appropriate myths, edited and reframed to serve the contemporary interest of the compilers, writes Padma Kaimal. The Chidambara Mahatmyam, the priestly redaction mostly written in the 12th century, with portions of it having been written in the previous 2 centuries, thus brings in the Vyagrapada story, the story of Adisesha being born as Patanjali in Thillai, the story of Bhikshadanar with a twist in the climax, and the local deity Thillai Kali is also re-choreographed and brought in order to Sanskritize the names of the place. Sitrambalam, mentioned in the Upper Thevaram as early as 620 AD, Siriya plus Ambalam. Ambalam means a place of congregation, like a village square from which you get the term Ambalakarar. And on another level, this also means the Paraveli, the Agasa, the wide regions of the Lord. Siriya, which means small, also means the subtle, Nutpamana, denoting Sith. So, Siriya plus Ambalam, Sitrambalam also meant Chit plus Ambaram, Chidambaram, a Sanskrit term earlier deployed by Tirumular in his Tirumandiram in the very first hymn of the Tirukuttu Tarisanam of the Onbadam Tandiram, which goes, Yengum Tirumeni, Yengum Sivasakti, Yengum Chidambaram, Yengum Tirunattam, Yengum Sivamai Iruttalal Engengum, Tangum Sivanarul Tan Vilayatade. Quoting this song, some scholars have argued for a late dating for Tirumular, claiming that Chidambaram gets mentioned in the Chidambara Mahatmyam, hence Tirumular belongs to the 11th century. There are still others who have claimed that this very hymn was an interpolation added to the Tirumandiram later on. While Zwelabel makes sense when he points out that Tirumular was simply using Chidambaram not as a place name but to denote the Lord who pervaded everywhere, and this again ironically goes against the basic claim of the Thillai priests who considered the Lord to be specially devoted to the place of Thillai. And here the thought process being As in the microcosm, so in the macrocosm. Sarada Srinivasan, the archaeometallurgist whom we saw in the previous episode, in her essay on Nataraja and the cosmic space, about which we will see in detail, denotes the microcosm and macrocosm as the Aham and Puram concepts of Sangam literature. Hence, Aham, he is the Lord dancing in one's heart, and here gets the name Antahapura. He is also Puram, who is dancing everywhere, and in that context, Chidambaram, as the town of the heart of the earth, gets the Sanskrit name Pundarikapura. The Sanskritization of the place names in the Chidambara Mahatmyam, with mythical stories created around them by the priests, well, we cannot go into all of them, but if we were to see one sample, how did Puliyur become Vyagrapura? A minor character from the Mahabharata epic, the saint Vyagrapadar, is shown by the priests as coming to perform penance in the Thillai Vanam, the forest of the Thillai trees. And here he worships Lord Shiva and requests for tiger's feet in order to be able to climb the trees and pick the choicest of flowers for the Lord's worship. Pleased by his asceticism, the Lord grants his wish, and because of his getting tiger's feet, he gets the name Vyagrapada, which means tiger's feet in Sanskrit. And because of his worshipping, the Thillai Vanam becomes Vyagrapura. The Tevara mover, Appar, Jnanasambandar and Sundarar have not heard of this term or the legend, nor has Manika Vasahar, who in his Kirti Thiru Ahaval has sung about many divine plays of the Lord, the Thiruvilayadal, but does not mention this legend. The name Vyagrapura itself appears for the first time in the inscription of Rajendra Chola III between 1246 and 1279 AD, and while the great Tamil scholar Rapi Sedupillai quotes Perumbuliyur, Kurumbuliyur, Sirupuliyur, that is south of Mayavaram, Padiri Puliyur, Yerukattam Puliyur and Irumpuliyur near Kanji, Kalk asks, how come these places that all have the suffix Puliyur have no association with the Vyagrapada legend? The fact that the tiger had been a Chola emblem since time immemorial, finding a place in their flag, in their coins and in the royal seals, also the tiger being a totemic symbol of Thillai itself, and the garment adorning the waist of the beautiful Adavallan, the tiger skin, which again gets another story about it, the descriptive root of the suffix Puliyur is ignored. Vyagrapura gets integrated into the sacred geography of the Mahabharata through its association with the character from the epic. A descriptive local term thus becomes a link to a pan-India legend. While Thillai is intimately connected with the local Tamil legends and the Bhakti movement, the lives and deeds of the Saivite Nayanmars, even those who were associated with Thillai, were not included in the official collection of legends in the Chidambara Mahatmyam. The priests of the temple were critically concerned with the earlier Tamil folklore and rewrote it according to their own needs, points Dr. Padma Kaimal. Other than Adisesha being born as Patanjali and coming to Thillai to worship the Lord, the Taruka Vanam story, which has Pikshadanar in it, gets a climax which is different from the original old version, wherein the dance of Shiva is unknown and the evil magical powers of the rishis are included here, where they are shown as using tigers and elephants and snakes in an attempt to destroy the Lord himself, which is a little absurd. And then comes the Hiranyavarman story. He is supposed to be a king who brings the 3000 priests to Thillai and also is shown as renovating the temple. Kalk, upon analyzing the Mahatmyam, suggests the legend of Hiranyavarma was created in a concrete historical milieu and identifies the mythical character with Klothunga I, who ruled from 1070 to 1118 AD, showing how ideas were borrowed from the very famous Kalingathu Parani by Jayam Kondar, which was sung on Klothunga Chola I. And here all the old names over the next 1000 years are forgotten, and Thillai is now Chidambaram. And then comes the very famous essay, The Dance of Shiva, published in 1912 by Ananda Kumarasamy, that brings international fame to Lord Nataraja. The essay opens with the lines, "The Lord of Thillai's court, a mystic dance performs." What is that, my dear? Well, when you read the Tamil original, which is beautifully sung by Manika Vasahar, the Tiruchaalal, that is in a question-answer format, a friendly banter between two girls, "Then pukka tan panai sul Thillai Chitrambalavan, tan pukku nattam pailumadu ennedi." Such a colloquial and beautiful hymn, "Ambalatte Koothadi, Amudusaya Palittiriyum, Nambanayum Devan endru Nannumadu ennedi." He is the homeless one who is dancing in a public space, the Ambalam, and he goes around begging for his food. How did we even consider him as ours and as our Lord? Asks one of these two girls. And here, the dance of Shiva also quotes extensively from Tirumular and Unmai Vilakkam. Well, for those of us who are Saivites and who are well versed with the basics of Saiva Siddhantam, nothing earth-shattering here. Ananda Kumarasamy, a celebrated metaphysician who made it his life's mission to popularize Indian art to the Western audience, was the curator of the Boston Museum at that time, that ensured a very wide reach for his views. Suddenly, the Adavallan was pushed into the limelight. The following year, the famous sculptor from France, Auguste Rodin, in his La Danse di Siva, writes about how he fell in love with the Nataraja at Tiruvalangadu, which is now in the Government Museum at Chennai, the Nataraja that he considers to be the most perfect expression of rhythmic movement in the world. E.B. Havell, a very influential British art historian and author of numerous books about Indian art and architecture, wrote even before in the year 1908 of how he witnessed the deep intellectual and spiritual tradition of the high craftsmen of antiquity, the sensuous vision of Tamil poet saints fluidly captured in bronze. Unlike European sculptures, which were usually made from a physical model, the South Indian icon makers did not have models and had to memorize all the relevant canon of measurements and then invoke the image of the deity by meditating inwardly. Ananda Kumarasamy calls them the Rishi artists, who had the ability to go beyond the visual plane and transmit a sense of the transcendental. To depict Shiva as the architect shaping the universe in his cosmic dance, capturing a fluid image, a daunting task that required a nameless artist to sit in deep meditation for inspiration, where, of course, at Thillai. Thinking of this, I am immediately reminded of a parallel in the story of Sekirar, who as the minister Arunmozhi Thevan to the great Chola king Anabaya Solan, the king requests his prime minister to compose an epic retelling the stories of the 63 Nayanmars, and the prime minister immediately requests that the king relieve him of his duties so that he can go to Thillai and sit and meditate to undertake this equally daunting task. The king agrees. Sekirar comes to Thillai and sits in deep meditation, and the very first word of the great epic Ulahalam is supposed to have rung out in the Artha Mandapam as an asariri, a divine voice. The Nataraja bronzes were manufactured using a technique known as the lost wax process, which of course we cannot see here in detail. But this is a very, very ancient technique of idol making. How old? Well, the first instance of the lost wax process used here is found in an amulet excavated at Mehergarh in the Indus Valley civilization. And of course, the famous dancing girl of Harappa was also made using the same technique. A very subtle element added to the icon, which denotes the dynamics between energy and matter, Shiva and Shakti, an iconological interpretation of the ear ornaments of the Lord, where on the left ear there is a Patra Kundala, a simple twisted palm leaf that was worn by village women of those days, while on the right ear the Lord wears the Mahara Kundala, which is a male earring, Hence, the Lord denotes the Umayurupahan or the Ardhanarishwarar as well. The Dance of Shiva essay concludes with the very famous lines, "In the night of Brahma, nature is inert and cannot dance till Shiva wills it. He rises from his rapture, and dancing sends through inert matter pulsing waves of awakening sound, and lo, matter also dances, appearing as a glory round about him. Dancing, he sustains the manifold activities in the fullness of time. Still dancing, he destroys all forms and names by fire and gives new rest." This is poetry, but nonetheless science. These words of Ananda Kumarasamy intrigued many an astrophysicist, and we will continue exploring Nataraja and the cosmic connect in the next episode. Vanakkam.